All right, I'm super excited for our Accelerate podcast, the sourcing room. And for the first time here, we have Christa Tuttle, the CEO and founder of JOIFEL. Christa, I'm so excited to have you because you have an extraordinary journey. Obviously, you were founder and CEO of Launch Marketing. You were there for 23 years. You scaled it. You built something incredible, and you had a very successful exit. And now you have another amazing company, JOIFEL. So I'm just like so eager to learn about this, and I think this episode is going to be very exciting for other owners and founders, especially in similar agencies or firms or in services based firms, to see how they can scale and potentially. Let me turn it over to you to give us a little bit of background about what you do, what JOIFEL does currently.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here today. So, today I really work with leaders and teams and very much are focused on aligning faster, communicating better, and building stronger relationships to deliver higher performance and productivity. And
Wow,
that's
that's
joyful. So,
I love that. I love the name, by the way. I know you just told me this before we started the session. Like the name really does. It brings joy. So I do really like that. So tell me a little bit about your current day. What are some of the strategies that you see or employ for leaders, or some of the gaps you're like, hey, in terms of scaling businesses or things that are maybe missing in executive leadership that you're seeing a trend to help them grow and develop their businesses?
yeah, absolutely. So my company Joyful was born from that I wanted to do only things that bring me joy after I exited launch. So I focused in on two things. And so one is I do CEO coaching and kind of peer advisory board facilitation, which I think that side aligns most directly with what you're talking about kind of growing and scaling. And what I see there is that a lot of times leaders, especially founder CEOs in fast early stage organizations, they're moving so quickly. It's about being able to step back and make sure there's a clear vision, strategy, and plan, and that it's being communicated to the team, because founders move fast. I mean, that's how we're wired, right? But the team always like, we process, we've made a decision, we're going this direction, and we expect the team to jump on board and follow. And many times they want to, they just need a little time to process and get to the same direction. So on the CEO side, it is just about kind of across the board vision, strategy, operationalizing the business, and scaling through getting the most from your team that you can. And then the other side is just communication and team effectiveness between leaders managing teams to increase productivity.
I love that you said, especially with founders and their vision, and then like just racing through what they have seen, but then also communicating that and the trickle down and what an impact that has. That's something that's very, very interesting. I do obviously want to jump into the scaling part and seeing how you sort of leverage that and make sure your team is sort of also geared towards building the vision that you have in a sustainable way. So you obviously had a company before this, and this could apply to this company, this could apply to launch marketing, your previous firm. I want to know, like, what were some of the frameworks, some of the early decisions you were like, hey, I'm going to do this and this and this so I can grow a business sustainable? Because some businesses you see grow rapidly fast, right? But they're not able to sustain that growth. So, what are some of the things that you did currently or in the past to make sure you were able to scale in a sustainable fashion?
Yeah, I think, one of the keys to that, no matter what size business, and you could be scaling from 1 to 10 or 100 to 1,000, is really thinking through not where you are today and what you want to accomplish today, but where does the business need to be in 2, 3, 5 years? And when you look at it from that lens, it is easier to kind of step back and be a little bit more in an abstract view and say, okay, in 5 years, I need the business organizationally to be structured like this. I need to have these types of margins and these particular product lines to continue research and expansion, or whatever those goals are. And then you can work backwards to the nearer term, if you will, and build a plan more objectively than subjectively to be able to say, here's what the foundations that I need to put in place. But, clear, I'm a big proponent of communication, but clear communication and development of like the strategy and plan, everything that you can do to operationalize, I believe that's very key to scaling the business. And then, we were talking about, I know we're here to talk about exiting. You also need to make sure you have like all the ducks in the row, if you will, from kind of a financial perspective, from I'm a services-based company. So from the clients, long-term contracts, etc. So it's a lot easier when you're not looking in the moment, you're looking farther ahead to be able to assess objectively. So that's key, I'd say.
Okay, that's really interesting. I like that. So you're like outwards first and then make your way back inwards to the more immediate present or short term execution, which I love. So there are moments like, and it could be model related, especially because when it comes to services are complicated, right? Like I feel like it's a little bit more nuanced. There's a little bit more human elements to be taken into consideration at times. So let's say we have certain agencies that are like, they hit like, a glass ceiling. What would you like recommend for them, right? Like, for example, we might be 3, 4 years in, we've hit a glass ceiling. Is there some things that a framework or a perspective, or maybe there's something they need to change in terms of pivoting and be like, hey, I need to kind of head in this direction to now further my growth because I'm like, maybe it's a model issue. I don't know. What advice would you give in those circumstances?
Yeah, absolutely. I think organizations at any size should use a business framework. That really helps to kind of more objectively view and assess the business and how it's going. Also, kind of then it helps you build out and think through and get clarity on your goals, your KPIs, quarterly, weekly, whatever, are the right time frames based on your size. One that I see used pretty widely, and I'm a huge fan of, is the entrepreneurial operating system. I know organizations that have self-implemented that. There are also amazing EOS facilitators out there that can help really implement it in the most solid fashion and help scale very quickly. I used EOS at launch as well, so very familiar with it and a big fan. But there are other frameworks out there too. I'm involved with TAB, which is the alternative board. They also have a framework that's like the operational blueprint that they use. So it's more about having one, utilizing it, and living by it consistently that I think has the biggest impact. And that will, every business goes through kind of plateaus or dips and then growth. And, those are all opportunities to continue to operationalize things better. And when I say that, services organizations, but even product organizations, they still go through, those peaks and valleys, if you will.
Right. And what do you think when it comes to like scaling, whether you're implementing a model, maybe you've hit that threshold, you have to pivot, revisit the framework and be like, how do I implement it? What are some of the common challenges you see? And I'm sure you see that like daily in your current position as well that people face. Is it like hiring the right talent? Is it just implementing the framework? Is it maybe like you said earlier, like vision translation down and building a culture that, people are motivated towards that vision? What are some of the bigger challenges when it comes to scaling?
Yeah, so I would say what I see more common at the earlier stages, founder-led organizations, it's hiring the right people. So it's right people, right seats, right time. That is probably the number one thing that I hear most frequently is I'm just not making the right hires. I keep firing people. And it's so nuanced, right? There's so many reasons that could be happening. It could be
Yeah.
poor management and poor communication. It could be right person, wrong seat. There's lots of variables, but generically at the earliest stage, that's something that I hear pretty consistently. And then with later stage organizations, something I find commonly is that, they often will have a framework in place and will be working, let's say, addressing a challenge or an issue that's come up. And sometimes I've seen teams get stuck in the group think where it's like analyzing the problem and kind of getting mired into that as opposed to being able to step back, say, this is a problem. We can't keep going this way. Here are three solutions. Let's agree and try this one and then go and move forward. So it's about, staying kind of focused, concise, and then moving the needle. And of course, not everything's going to work the first time, right? So if you have three options and B doesn't work, then you regroup in whatever is the appropriate time frame, but quickly, and switch to A or C, or maybe another one.
Right. I'm a sucker for contingency planning. I like to have the whole alphabet laid out there. So I hear you on that one. So I want to get a little bit more into the weeds of like the business. I think a really good now. This is interesting because there's a bit of an intersection of there's the scaling side of it, but then there's also the hiring side of it, and there's also the what you call it, like the culture. There's like there's a cross section, which is I would say, how have you done a good job? Clearly, you have because you had such a successful exit, and continue to do that when it comes to acquiring new clients, sustaining them, right? There's obviously the sales and marketing process, but I also want to know the human elements because I feel like client retention is something that's so important. And so many, when it comes to acquisitions, that's the first thing. Do you have recurring revenue? What is your client's longevity? What is the lifetime value of the client? So, what are some things that you've put in place or currently or in the past to make sure that is something that you guys are able to successfully do?
Yes, no, absolutely. Especially in a services organization, it is all about the people. So you think about your team members, your clients, your partners, and that is a top question in the M&A process is how do you keep the team? How do you keep the clients? And so to address that, regardless, not even related to exiting the business, but just related to being in good business, right? You're in partnerships with your clients, especially in a services organization. And so, of course, we really worked on not just once we got them to be a client, but we were very high touch and very high communication throughout our engagement. So for us, that looked like weekly updates. So at the end of the week, we would recap key accomplishments. We would note the things in flight. We would note things coming up ahead for the following week or any action items we needed from the client. That communication generally happened weekly. And then with that, sometimes it happened in emails, sometimes it happened via phone. It was kind of more client dependent as to how that communication happened. And I say dependent because it was also what their preferences were. But regardless, our role, we were dropping in as a virtual CMO or VP of marketing and team. So it was a very high profile, high impact role that we played. So we were in touch with them all the time. But that I think was really key, keeping that communication open. They never wondered what we thought. Or what we were working on. We also, I always like to say to my team, take a step back and look at the client, the whole business. We might be involved in marketing or launching a new product, but the whole business, we want to understand what their key initiatives are, what their goals are in 1, 3, 5 years, because that insight impacts marketing or impacts sales or whatever other area of the business a company is working on. And so that also provided us a more holistic view, but also a more strategic view that when we could incorporate into our role in our marketing efforts, some commentary that aligned with what their goals were, even though if it wasn't something directly we had impact on.
Communication is something so central, and doesn't matter what industry you're in, it ends up being the backbone of your success, whether it's internal or external. So, okay,
Absolutely.
amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
So, I'm obviously MA exiting is definitely a core focus for us. And I have a question. Again, like on the services side, I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, like you as a leader are probably very, very involved. There's a little bit of human dependency. Obviously, you have your frameworks, you're training people, there's a culture, you're training your people to also, like you said, look at your clients holistically and their goals. So when you have this kind of setup, I think I have a twofold question. Did you from the get-go like set it up with a vision of, hey, I want to exit in X amount of years? Or was there like a pivotal stage where like, you know what, I want to see this company like beyond me. Like how does it operate beyond the CEO or run as its own entity? Was there like an inflection point, or how did you kind of envision this?
Yeah. So I will say that when I first started my company, I knew at some point I would like to exit, but there was no timeline. But I did even just some basic things. Services companies, oftentimes they can incorporate the founder's name or things like that. And I really tried to set it up as this like third party entity from day one. It was probably about year 16 when I was like, I'm ready. So, and that was when I created kind of like, I said, I want to exit in 5 years. So then there was a very more focused intention on exiting. And so, that kind of drove it. It took me a little bit longer than that. It took me 6 years, but it was close enough.
No, that's amazing. Like,
Yeah.
and what are some of like the things like if you were to advise people in your, let's say they're planning their exit, be like, hey, like these are some of the things you absolutely have to get clear on in order for you to have a successful exit.
Yeah. So as far as the business structure or as a founder, your like clarity on what's important to you.
That's good. I think I'd like the answer for both.
Okay. All right. So I will say for like from a business perspective, and this is kind of my philosophy always is, although it feels like you're on a lonely road doing things for the first time, there are many other entrepreneurs or leaders that have done something very similar before. So I've always surrounded myself with others. So throughout my entrepreneurial journey, I would talk to people that had exited and I'd ask them questions like, what worked? What didn't? What did you learn? What do you recommend? And so that was really kind of insightful to me in the planning process. So when I started being like, I kind of had worked on things all along just to try to make sure I had a solid business. But then in that last 5 years, I really focused in on making sure what I tell everybody is finances need to be as clean as possible. And I actually took my financials to a friend who was in the M&A space and was like, hey, will you analyze this and just give me feedback? What's confusing? What could be concerning? What should I consider changing? That type of stuff. And I got great feedback from that. So finances being key, I would say contracts with clients. You mentioned this earlier. In the services industry, that's your revenue. So, if the company sells and every client leaves, that's not a business. And so it's, having high customer satisfaction. We did net promoter surveys every year, so I could show for like 15 years our NPS scores. And we also had longer term contracts in place. We had a good like lifetime value view as best as possible because we worked in tech. So there'd be situations where we'd have a client that was acquired and then that client was acquired. And, so it looked like four companies, but it was really the same one. But so those were key things. And then the founder or CEO not being pivotal to the business. So if you want to get to a place where you could leave and be offline for, ideally like 2 months, I feel like that's a good benchmark. Because if you can do 2 months, you can do 3 or 5 or 6, but that's really, really critical because the business needs to be able to operate without you if you truly want to be able to exit. So.
Yeah, I love that. Especially like I guess that also is interesting because it's a good transition into what you're doing as well because you're building obviously people in your current position, and that's pretty
Yeah.
cool. I love how you said the building the business without the founder. I feel like that's a tough one, especially like, like the going offline for 2 months, I think, or whatever benchmark you want. I think that's a really challenging part. And I think founders also having the psychological thing of letting go and taking a step back and making sure they have a team that can operate. I do see that a lot when it comes to acquisitions, and that's a challenging part. So you mentioned that you shared your valuations or your financials, sorry, with a friend in M&A. Did you have a hired professional, like an M&A professional run process, or was it a founder-led process for you when it came to an exit?
When I did exit, yes, I actually worked with a M&A agency out of New York that specialized in marketing firms. And so they kind of held my hand through the process. It was amazing. But I did that financials was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years earlier because I wanted to make sure everything was, really clean and set up well. And it worked out great because when I went almost all the way through an acquisition, and in that, the acquirer had hired a third party to do all of the due diligence assessment. And at the end of that process, they're like, you had some of the cleanest books we've seen, top 5%. And I was like, yes.
Wow,
So,
I love
I mean,
that.
that's a reflection of the effort that was put in. So once it was set up well and just maintained, it's easy to maintain. It's more about making sure you have it set up well to begin with. So
Yeah, I think so. That's a really good tip for people who are either launching a business or like maybe they're 5 to 10 years down the line from an exit is to make sure your books are clean and
yeah.
maybe have them designed to match a standard that when you are in that process, you don't have to start from scratch. Because I think the biggest block that I've seen is getting financials, organizing financials to make sense of them. So that's a really good takeaway. So if you're watching this podcast and you're a business owner, there's one thing you can do. That is it, essentially. No, I love that. I think another big question I have for you, and I'm sure this is probably on a lot of people's mind, is finding the right successor, right? Like, who is like, how did you go through that criteria? Was it someone you already knew? Was it external? Tell us about what was like, hey, this is my criteria. This is my thought process. Because this is like your legacy, right? In some ways that you pass on to somebody. So, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I shared I worked with an M&A agency, and so they, vetted and then created meetings. I kind of refer to the process as dating, to be honest, and felt like it was as much about me learning about them as them learning about me. And I went through a lot of conversations in the first kind of couple of weeks with them. And in that, I had like 10 questions, and I don't remember what exactly all those questions were, but I wanted consistency in the questions. But the first two were around culture and core values. And if there wasn't alignment on that, and there's no right or wrong for an organization's culture or core values, but if there wasn't alignment with ours, or that wasn't maybe seen as a priority, then it was not a good match for us. And I got that too because I said I surround myself with entrepreneurs, so I ask questions all the time. Well, the most successful exits have had culture and core values alignment, but also the most successful post-exit implementations and growth have had culture and core values alignment. And at launch, we worked with a good number of companies through exits and that transition period, and so got to see that firsthand, both the successes and the more challenging scenarios. And so that was really, really key for me.
I like that. And then, it's funny because a lot of in our buy side work, we hear that a lot from, founders is that we want to make sure there's certain non-negotiables and culture and values absolutely falls into that. There has to be alignment. And also because they want to make sure that their people are taken care of. I really
Yeah.
love that. I love that with business owners. Like they really care about their teams and making sure the right people stay in the right places as well. I had this private equity client who acquired a company, and one of the terms was that there was a very elderly accountant, like 80 plus years old, who had been in the company for forever. And they were like, if you acquire this, like she's staying on till like whenever she
Yeah.
wants to stay on. And I think I like that. And I think that should be one of the criterias for selecting a successor.
Absolutely. Well, it's top of my list for sure.
Right. And I think just as a closing thing, like if you were to give any advice to whether it's business owners in the services side or elsewhere, like when it comes to building your business or exiting, what's the one piece of advice would you give them?
Ooh, the one piece of advice to give somebody that's exiting. I would probably say just enjoy the journey and appreciate the reflection back on the business that you've built, but also plan for your what's next. Because as an entrepreneur, your company's kind of your baby, right? And for many, and where it's exciting to go through an exit, it's a goal that many want to go through. Oftentimes, the reality of going through that and the shift in role can be very hard on founders. And so, having it what's next in place, I think, is very key to success.
I love that. That's really, really helpful, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to take a lot of golden nuggets from this conversation. And I really appreciate you taking the time out to speak with me, because what I like is that you had this journey as an exit, like as a founder building a company, exiting. Then you have all this beautiful insight around scaling sustainability, and then also what you're currently doing, which is coaching and taking. I'm sure there are a lot of lessons you're implementing on a day-to-day basis, right, in your coaching, etc. So if people were to trying to get in touch with you or try to find you or want to reach you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Absolutely. So I can be reached on email at Christa@joyfulconsulting.com, and it's CHRIS as in Sam TA. And then joyful is the phonetic spelling. So JOIFEL consulting.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me under /comms expert.
Well, we appreciate that, and we're excited. I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of questions for you, and we'll make sure either they'll directly reach out to you or we'll pass on those questions. Christa, again, thank you so much. Really appreciate this. This was extremely, extremely insightful.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for hosting me.